class 8. Today I am going to start the chapter after 20 years. The policeman on the beat moved up the avenue impressively. The impressiveness was habitual and not for show, for spectators were few. So the policeman who was on his regular route, usually he covered that particular route. Particular road. He was guarding that particular road in a very impressive manner or in a very stylish manner. The impressiveness means that it was a very habitual impressiveness, and he was not showing it to anyone because there were very few spectators, means people who could see his attitude at that point of time or at that point of night. The time was barely 10 o'clock at night, but chilly gusts of wind with a taste of rain in them had well nigh depuled the streets. So the time was just 10 o'clock at night, but chilly means very cold wind or irregular strong flow of wind was blowing at that time, and there was also rainfall was there, and as a result there were very less people on the streets. Trying doors as he went, twirling his club with many intricate and artful movements, turning now and then to cast his watchful eye down the Pacific thoroughfare, the officer with his stalwart form and slight swagger made a fine picture of a guardian of peace. So when he was just guarding the avenue or that particular road, he was guarding the avenue, and he was just moving his club, means moving his small stick with many intricate and artful movements, means in a very skillful and in a clever way. He was just moving his stick now and then, and he was also very alert, and he kept his watchful eye down the peaceful road. The officer was very strongly built, and he was tall, and he was very stylish, and it seemed that he was representing or he was representing the total peaceful atmosphere, and he was the keeper of peace in that particular area. The vicinity was one that kept early hours. So the surrounding hours was what? If you see that early morning, you will see that everything is empty, and in the vicinity means the surrounding area was totally silent. Now and then you might see the lights of a cigar store or of an all-night lunch counter, but the majority of the doors belonged to the business places that had long since been closed. So one could see that lights were coming from a cigar store or an all-night lunch counter, means the whole night the counters were open to provide people with lunch or dinner or to provide people with food. But the majority of the doors, means of the majority of the doors which were there around the street or the shops or all those things were long closed. When about a midway of a certain block, the policeman suddenly slowed his walk. In the doorway of a darkened hardware store, a man leaned with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. As the policeman walked up to him, the man spoke up quickly. So when the policeman came in the midway of a certain block, means of a certain area of that of the area where he was patrolling or where he was guarding, the policeman just slowed his walk. And in the doorway of a darkened hardware store, what happened? A man was leaning, means a man was just bending a little bit with an unlighted cigar, means he was smoking a cigar, but that was not lighted at that point of time. And he could see that man was standing near the slightly stooping there, and standing just near the darkened hardware store, means the hardware store was already closed, and in front of that dark hardware store, the unknown man or the stranger was standing with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. As the policeman walked up to him, the man spoke up quickly. So when the policeman came to him, the man spoke up quickly. It says, "All right, officer," he said reassuringly. I am just waiting for a friend. It's an appointment made 20 years ago. Sounds a little funny to you, doesn't it? Well, I will explain if you would like to make certain it's all straight. About that, long ago, there used to be a restaurant where this store stands, Big Joe Brady's restaurant. So he just wanted to clarify his position, So he just shouted loudly and told the officer that everything was all right, and he wanted to make sure that nothing was wrong there. And he also pointed out that he had come there to keep an appointment which was made 20 years ago. And the man, he also knew the fact that it was a pretty funny thing, because a man who had made an appointment 20 years ago came there after 20 years to keep the appointment. So he wanted to again he pointed out that thing to the police officer, and he also told that everything was right, nothing was wrong going there. So he also asked the policeman that where he was standing there used to be a restaurant, means the name of the restaurant was Big Joe Brady's restaurant. Until 5 years ago, said the policeman, it was torn down then. So the policeman told what, that 5 years ago the restaurant was torn down. The man in the doorway struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond, oddly set. So the man in the doorway was standing. He just struck a match, means he just lit up his cigar. Then in the light of the match, it could be seen that the face could be seen of the man. It was a pale face. He had a square-jawed face with very keen eyes, means very eager eyes or sharp eyes. And he had a little white scar, means little white mark is there near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin, means with which the scarf was tied round his neck with a pin. That pin was made of diamond, but it was set in a very strange manner. 20 years ago, said the man, I dined here at Big Joe Brady's with Jimmy Wells, my best chum and the finest chap in the world. So 20 years ago, that particular night, he had dined there at the Big Joe Brady's restaurant with Jimmy Wells, his best friend, and he considered him to be the greatest and finest person in the world. He and I were raised in New York, just like two brothers together. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. So they both brought up in New York, just like two brothers together, and he was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning, I was to start from the west to make my fortune. So that particular the next morning, he was to go away to the west to establish himself, because he did not want to stay at New York and he wanted to try his luck in the west. So he wanted to leave that particular place. And he couldn't have dragged Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. So for Jimmy, New York was the best place, and he was very homesick and he did not want to leave New York. But Bob was very ambitious, or this person, the stranger, whose name you will be going to know that his name was Bob. So that person was very ambitious and he just left New York and went to the west. Well, we agreed that night we would meet here again exactly 20 years from that date and time, no matter what our conditions might be or from what distance we might have to come. So they both dined at that particular night or 20 years ago, and they promised to each other that after 20 years on that same date they would again meet. Whatever conditions they might be in, they would not care, but they would meet again exactly at the same time after 20 years. We figured that in 20 years, each of us ought to have our destiny worked out and our fortunes made, whatever they were going to be. So they just pointed out that if they thought that their destiny would work out, means they would be able to establish themselves, whatever they were going to be. It sounds pretty interesting, said the policeman. Rather a long time between meets, though it seems to me. Haven't you heard from your friends since you left? Yeah, the policeman found it very interesting, and the policeman replied that they had not met for a long time. But it seemed to be that very long time they had not met with each other. But they haven't you heard from your friends since you left? That then he asked that if the person, the stranger, had any contact with his friend after he had left. Well, yes, for a time we corresponded, said the other, but after a year or two we lost track of each other. You see, the West is a pretty big proposition, and I kept hustling around over it pretty lively. Well, for a particular period of time they just corresponded with each other, but after a or two, they just lost track of each other, means they could not keep their contact with each other. But West is a very pretty big place, means something which was West was a very pretty big place to be dealt with, and he kept hustling around over it in a pretty lively manner, means in a very active way. He had to go here and there, he had to hurry up, and like this he continued his life in the West.